I love these windswept ancient rock formations. And it's always incredible in Sydney that you can be in places like this and not have any other people around, and you're still not that far from the centre of the city.
Two years stranded in Sydney have provided a fantastic opportunity to rediscover my love of this Australian landscape.
Hello there, and greetings from the Yarrangobilly National Park north of Sydney. This is about as far north in Sydney as you can actually get, and this is Broken Bay and Pittwater through there. It's a beautiful part of the city, some lovely walks and some great beaches around here as well. Normally at the end of a year or the beginning of a new year, I take some time out to think about the previous year of travel. But at the end of 2021, I didn't get around to doing that. And one of the reasons for that was that 2021 was the year I travelled the least of any year in many, many decades, probably since I was a kid.
Your travel plans will have been interrupted during the pandemic as well. But when I say I travelled less in 2021 than any year in recent memory, I'm using an industrial measure of travel. Kilometres, flights, the number of cities visited. Those metrics don't take account of things like the quality of travel and the experience of travel. Nor do they account for the carbon footprint or resources consumed in travel. It may be that I've spent as much time travelling during the pandemic as I did in 2019. It's just that I've been travelling differently, mostly on foot or by bicycle. A lot of it outside my back gate. If you're exploring your local area, then outside the back gate does count as travel, right? I think so, and it certainly felt like the learning and discovery of travel to me. But I ended up covering only a tiny percentage of the territory I would normally cover in a year. And my carbon footprint must have almost fallen away to nothing.
I still feel like I had a pretty meaningful year of travel. And the reason it was so meaningful was I poured all that energy that normally gets poured into international travel into making sense of Sydney, making sense of Australia.
Making sense of Sydney and Australia is more than a life's work, but I can safely say that I'm less ignorant than I was. And it was great channeling that new learning into a new Sydney walking tour over at Old Compass Travel. It's called Sydney, Tales of the City. If Sydney's post-colonisation history interests you, I'm sure you'll find this walk an eye-opener. Getting started on a Rusty Compass travel guide to Sydney and Australia has also been a fantastic way to channel pandemic energy. And it's already given me some incredible experiences with lots more to come.
That's quite a force.
So what are some other big travel lessons I've learned during the pandemic? In a way, they're probably things I was trying to practice a little bit. And you've probably thought about a few of these things yourself. The pandemic has definitely opened up plenty of time for thinking. It's worth noting them because I want to keep them in mind when we start to travel internationally again. The first lesson I want to hold on to is that the best moments in travel happen on your 2 feet or on a bicycle. I guess that's one I knew before the pandemic, but I plan to practice it more from here on. That'll mean spending more, better quality time in fewer places. I guess I need to add that when it comes to the natural world, many of my best travel experiences are had by the water or in the water. It's heaven to be back in the water at Nelson Park again. My love of rail travel has been reaffirmed during the pandemic, and I look forward to lots more. Though if the number of shuttered railway stations I've visited over the last year are any indication, I sense the decision makers here in New South Wales don't share my affection for the railways. Another lesson I've learned is that there's probably more treasure hiding in your neighbourhood than you realise. I could easily be talking about Saigon or Hanoi, but in this case I'm talking about Sydney's inner west. It's an area I was confined to for 4 months during Sydney's lockdown, and that confinement turned out to be a blessing. I now have a deeper appreciation of this area. One of the cool things about this neighbourhood is that everybody seems to view their front garden as a little place for a bit of self-expression. Every house is contributing a little bit of love to the neighbourhood, and that's what makes these streets so beautiful. There was so much to discover here, stuff I'd never seen before. History, incredible old heritage detail, amazing community pride and little community initiatives. Like this precious little patch of bush right by the urban intensity, and this little community garden. There's been a less positive lesson learned in my couple of years getting to know Sydney again. Not so much a lesson for travellers, but a lesson I've taken from exploring Sydney. It struck me as I explored parks and public spaces and museums and galleries that most of Sydney's best decisions about public amenities were made many decades ago. Some go back a century. For the last couple of decades, governments have been more interested in reversing or privatising the great public works and public decisions of many decades past. It's a problem afflicting neoliberal controlled cities the world over. Sydney's biggest recent landmark development is a casino mired in scandal that dominates the skyline from all angles. Some would say it's an apt monument to Australia's world-beating addiction to gambling. In Sydney, developers seem to have gained an unassailable hand in government decision-making. The problem was brought into focus in Parramatta in Sydney's west. This cute little piece of heritage in the middle of Parramatta's overdeveloped centre was demolished during the Sydney lockdown of 2021, despite community opposition. Willow Grove's demolition and the Parramatta powerhouse project that caused it are a case study in how not to do public development. History and heritage have always been big parts of my travelling world, and Rusty Compass has often gotten involved with heritage questions in Vietnam and Cambodia. And one of the surprises about being back in Sydney is how many sort of unresolved heritage issues there are here as well. The biggest surprise is the state of this place, the female factory, also in Parramatta. It remembers First Nations connection to this land, women's history, and our history of incarceration. It's one of the most important historical sites in Australia, but it's mostly unknown here. There are now finally museum plans for this site, but they don't really seem to capture the heritage and community opportunities that the site offers. If you're interested in the female factory, I've written more about it on the Rusty Compass blog, and there are other videos about it as well. That little diversion isn't a bad segue into another of the travel lessons I will take from the pandemic. Like most things, the best travel experiences will be had if you invest in knowing something about the place you're travelling to. If you want travel to mean something, read a book, talk to local people, visit a cemetery, try and understand something about the place you're visiting.
So it's a cold, wet winter afternoon in Sydney. Perfect conditions for a little bit of cemetery exploration.
It's always good to have your ideas tested too. And these past couple of years in Sydney have been a chance for me to reread Australian history and to better understand the gaping hole in the history I learned at school and at university. I've discovered villains and heroes that I'd never heard of. Unsettled was a First Nations curated exhibition at the Australian Museum in 2021. And it's an astonishing thing, but this is the first time I have ever seen an Indigenous curated exhibition in Australia. That would have been true for most people who visited Unsettled. Unsettled should be part of a permanent exhibition somewhere. And by now, 2022, there really should be an Indigenous History and Culture Museum in Sydney. Visitors to the city, particularly international visitors, have been asking me about this for decades. So I'm going to wrap up this little set of reflections on travel lessons from 2 unplanned years in pandemic Sydney, where we began back in the breathtaking Australian bush. These glorious landscapes provide nourishment for the soul. So does the wonderful human interaction of travel that we've been missing dearly during the pandemic. Travel industry problems like over-tourism and environmental harm were getting bad press before the pandemic. They'll still be risks when the pandemic ends. And now we have the silliness of leisure space travel to distract us from the beauty all around us. Even as travellers, we're going to have to come out of this wiser and better. Thanks very much. Travel well and talk soon.
If you're not already subscribed, hit the subscribe button so we can travel some more together in 2022. You can also head over to Rusty Compass for independent travel information about Australia, Vietnam, Cambodia, and a little bit of Laos as well. And look forward to travelling in 2022. I hope I do get beyond Australia this year. Hope I get back to Vietnam. It is starting to feel a little more hopeful. Talk soon.